the Super Bowl out of me. Believe that. Believe that.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to week number 9 of the Everything Ravens podcast. My name is Logan. I'm the host of this podcast. I run the Instagram account at everything_Ravens on Instagram, which is the biggest Ravens fan page community on Instagram, sitting at 38.5 thousand followers as we start this recording. Make sure you follow that account as well as follow at Everything Ravens podcast on Instagram for all your latest podcast needs. Today we have another guest. Last week we brought on Jay at Eagles_Empire onto the pod. This week we're bringing on a Redskins fan page, which is Jess at httr.nation.
Hey, appreciate you having me on the pod. Excited to talk, some Ravens, Redskins football. Week 4, I believe. Go over a couple draft classes. So let's do it.
And of course, we have Brooks on this week, as always.
Hey guys, excited to be back and continue the series, previewing some of the Ravens matchups in this upcoming season and getting a different perspective from another team's super fans from around the league.
All right, so let's not keep anyone waiting. They know what they came for. We are going to preview the Ravens-Redskins matchup, one of the best interconference rivalries in the league, Battle of the Beltway. These teams are like 30 miles apart in Landover and Baltimore, so there's always going to be some heat going into this game. So we play the Redskins week 4 at 1 o'clock at FedEx Field. What are your guys' thoughts on this matchup?
Well, I personally, I'm not expecting a win. I'll say that right now. Obviously, the 2019 Redskins were not a very good team. And when I say not very good, I mean very bad. Deserved that number 2 overall pick, and the Ravens were obviously at least a top 3 team in the league last year and only improved their roster. But I will say I do have some faith in the Redskins to make this matchup competitive. I've really liked what they've done in terms of reshaping the whole coaching staff. Big fan of, obviously, Ron Rivera, Jack Del Rio, great defensive coordinator history. Scott Turner, interesting offensive coordinator, but I got faith that the Redskins can make it a competitive ball game. I'm not too sure about the win by any means, but looking forward to an interesting one.
Yeah, these games have always been kind of competitive in the past. I know these two teams only face off once every 4 years, but as you said, that Battle of the Beltway's rivalry certainly plays a factor. They've been close games. We have not played in Landover since our Super Bowl year, where we had a brutal loss late in the season, and then we had a brutal loss 4 years ago in Baltimore with that C.J. Mosley botched reaching for the end zone where he fumbled out the back attempt. I think the Redskins are clearly in rebuild mode, and they won't be up to the task quite yet for week 4. I think what makes this matchup interesting, though, is, Chase Young and that Redskins young defensive line. They'll be after Lamar. Lamar will have a target on his back. Chase Young came out and said that the quarterback he looks forward to sacking the most is Lamar Jackson, so we'll see if Lamar has something special in store for him. And then, of course, with this whole COVID-19 corona aspect to this game, you have to keep that in fact. It's always interesting because it's always kind of a home game for both teams. These teams travel really well. It's always been 50-50 in the stadiums. The road team comes either way. And with what's going on right now, we don't know if we'll be able to have that in the stands, which is an aspect of this game I always like.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things that strikes me about this game is we get an Ohio State reunion in this game. And when I mean reunion. We get Dwayne Haskins, Terry McLaurin, Chase Young on the Redskins, and we get J.K. Dobbins and Malik Harrison on the Ravens. They were all part of some of those great Ohio State teams these past few years, so I think that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, Brooks, like you just mentioned, big thing, Chase Young obviously publicly said really wants to get that Lamar Jackson sack, and I think the biggest thing for the Redskins to at least want to stay competitive with the Ravens, obviously who have the much superior roster in comparison. I think the big thing is, and I guess this flows through their entire defense generally, is that they want to get the pass rush going on the Ravens. They have a very good offensive line. Obviously, the face of it, Ronnie Stanley, top 3, if not the best offensive tackle in the league right now. So hopefully with the Redskins being able to have such a deep defensive roster and defensive line roster, and Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Matt Ioannidis just in the middle, and you got obviously Ryan Kerrigan, Montez Sweat, Chase Young on the edge. I think if they're able to keep those guys fresh, keep them rotating in, they can maybe wear down that Ravens offensive line a couple quarters into the game and start putting more pressure on Lamar, and then maybe trying to force him to make some throws he might not want to do usually. So I think that's the real key if they want to at least have a chance to come away with a victory.
Yeah, I mean, it is totally a copycat league, and the Redskins have taken that model that the 49ers laid out last season with that Nick Bosa solidifying their defensive line, and they put that into place in their own system. They now have 4 first-round picks in that front 4 on their defense, all 4 under 25. That's Deron Payne, Montez Sweat, Chase Young, and Jared Allen. Those guys will try to get after Lamar, and it will be the same thing on the other side of the ball. The Ravens, with a young quarterback in Dwayne Haskins, learning a new system only 4 weeks into the season, I'm sure, will dial up the pressure, show him some new looks, try to confuse him, and rattle him early. So that will be an interesting thing to watch during this game. I think both teams are going to try to get after the quarterback, cause turnovers, wreak havoc, and think if the Redskins want to win this game, it's going to have to be a sloppy game that they pull out in that way.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned, having a sloppy kind of game, which is what the feel we've gotten with the 2012 matchup and the 2016 matchup. In both those games, both had very sort of unorthodox feels to them. In 2016, like you mentioned previously, the C.J. Mosley botched interception. I believe there's also a Justin Tucker fake field goal where he threw it and it bounced off the back of a guy's helmet. There's a punt return touchdown that game. I know the Redskins were really thin on corners. And then in 2012, obviously you had RG3 go down, Kirk Cousins come in, big Richard Crawford punt return overtime. So these games have shown a tendency, at least, to be they've surprised us in the past, is what I'm trying to get at. And I think, great point, like you just mentioned. If the Redskins do want to come away with a win against a better team, they're going to have to pull some hat tricks out of the box, like maybe getting a special teams touchdown or, forcing a big turnover on defense.
Yeah, and while the Redskins had a down year last year, and I know it's a new system in place this year with Ron Rivera, the way they stayed competitive against better teams, like that game against the 49ers, was playing a little sloppy, playing a little old school football, and making other teams stoop to their level and sort of have to get down and dirty if they want to pull out games. I think the Ravens are willing to do that and have enough speed and athleticism to sort of outflank the Redskins and surpass that style of play. But it will be an interesting thing to watch and see if the Redskins front 4 can contain Lamar and frustrate him.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how Lamar goes against his front 4, the Redskins. And like I mentioned last week with Jay, one thing that worries me about this game with the Redskins is that interior. They have Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, both good young Bama defensive linemen, and we have a very questionable interior offensive line with Marshall Yonda now gone, with Bradley Bozeman, and then who else? Whether it's Matt Skura, Patrick McCarry, Ben Powers, DJ Fluker. There's a lot of questions, more questions than answers when it comes to this interior offensive line. So I think they're going to have a big test with this Redskins defensive line.
And speaking about more questions than answers, last pod when we reviewed the Eagles matchup, I said Miles Sanders was a big concern for me, and I would love to get Jess's opinion on the Redskins backfield and how that's going to all sort out in this new Ron Rivera offense.
Yeah, great question. I mean, the Redskins, obviously on paper, looking at some of their running backs, you got Adrian Peterson coming over, who's now going into, I believe, 12, 13 season, 34 years of age, getting up there, but still ran for about 900 yards last year. Obviously, you have Darius Geis coming back, who a lot of people are excited about. You got Antonio Gibson, third-round draft pick that really fits sort of new offensive coordinator Scott Turner's mold for running back that he sort of is looking for from the team. But I would not sleep on J.D. McKissick, who they signed in free agency. A lot of people on Redskins Twitter, a couple of Redskins group chats would mention him recently. I think he's a great wide receiver / running back kind of hybrid guy. And that Scott Turner's offense, or at least a Panthers-led offense the last 3 years, at least under Christian McCaffrey, I believe it was that they had the highest targets to running backs of any team in the league all 3 years. So I think that's definitely something that's going to carry over with sort of a pretty familiar or similar offensive staff to what was in Carolina. Darius Geis is who I'm really excited about, I got to say. Obviously, some say he's kind of going down the Dalvin Cook path here. Torn ACL year 1, various knee injuries year 2, and then a big year 3. Because I was just watching something on Twitter the other day where Darius Geis has about 10 to 15 highlight plays on under 50 career touches, which I got to say is a pretty good ratio in terms of big plays versus touches. And he's really, I mean, in the 5 games that he played last year, he really showed why people are excited about him, but just comes down those injuries. So I think Adrian Peterson might be an odd man out for the Redskins system. I haven't publicly said this on my account yet because I might get crucified for it, but I would say he's not a lock to make the roster. That's sort of a bold prediction I'm hanging on to. But yeah, J.D. McKissick, Antonio Gibson, Darius Guice, all very good in terms of good mix of pure runners and great receivers. I'm really excited to see how the Redskins use them because aside from Terry McLaurin, you don't really have many receiving threats for the team. And so I really think the Dwayne Haskins offense is really going to run through those passes to the running back and run through the running back by committee.
Yeah, and you didn't even really mention Bryce Love and the Peyton Barber who they brought over from Tampa. So there's a lot of toys for Ron Rivera and that Washington offense to play with. And you mentioned Gibson. I think that was a great pick. Certainly a versatile player. When you're looking for athleticism and playmakers on offense because you don't have a lot in either the backfield or in the wide receiver group, he's a great fit because he can do a little bit of everything. Certainly someone to watch on. Was a little slept on in the draft, kind of like Terry McLaurin, but when you go back to his tape, and you talked about it with Guice, his big playability per touch is outstanding. And when you're trying to create offense, having a guy like that on the field would definitely help spread the wealth and create mismatches across the field.
Yeah, and going back to the point with more questions than answers, the Redskins have Dwayne Haskins at quarterback, who a lot of people have already written him off as a bust because of a poor rookie year. I haven't really written him off yet. I think he definitely has time to improve. But I think, like Brooks was mentioning, like Jess was mentioning, if you have those running backs that can catch the ball, that really makes life a lot easier for Dwayne Haskins, especially with those limited pass-catching weapons. So what's your thoughts on Dwayne?
Well, I mean, Dwayne, I was a huge Dwayne guy heading into the 2019 draft. He was, I believe since March, I sort of pegged him as my number 1 quarterback before even any Redskins talk, any Redskins connections popped up back then. He just so happened to obviously fall to the team at pick 15. And 2019, I'd say, my gosh, where to even begin? Just so much went wrong, I guess, from the jump. Haskins, again, I'm not necessarily expecting a big season from him in 2020, but I really want to give him the benefit of the doubt because a Jay Gruden offense is supposedly, again, I have no idea what any of these concepts are really, but a Jay Gruden offense has been spoken on as very complicated offense to learn. It takes players like Kirk Cousins, Alex Smith, Colt McCoy, Robert Griffin III, all the quarterbacks that have been under Gruden in his prior tenure. They all publicly said how it was such sort of a complicated, so many moving parts of an offense they wanted to get down. So for Dwayne Haskins, who many can attest to, was an inexperienced college player that came out of the draft, getting that offense right off the bat that not even Alex Smith, one of the smartest players in the NFL, had down by the time the season started, I don't think that's something you can really hold against him. And adding on to that, Jay Gruden was pretty much fighting for his job. 2019, was a make-or-break year for Gruden. He knew it, and he didn't really have much of a drive to want to develop a rookie quarterback for a future that he likely wouldn't be in. And so a lot of the attention went to helping Case Keenum get up to tempo with the offense. And so Haskins' development, at least in the summer, sort of got neglected. I think that's something a lot of people look over. And adding on to that, once Gruden was fired, Bill Callahan took over and became the primary, I guess, offensive philosophy of the team, and that the Redskins' run-to-pass attempts, I believe in the Callahan era, were about 35 to 15 a game. So you want to be getting more than 50 snaps of offense a game as is. But when it's the ratio of 35 rushes to about 15 passes a game, for a rookie quarterback who's going in and out of the lineup, that is not a good formula to sort of help him get in the flow of learning the game and learning NFL speed. And once Kevin O'Connell, a more modern offensive coordinator, took over late in the season, that's when you really saw Dwayne Haskins start to flourish in that Giants game and that Eagles game especially. And that's why so many fans got such a new rejuvenated confidence in him, is that you saw a modern offensive coordinator get their hands on him, and even just for a brief amount of time, you saw him being a really good football player. And that's what's got a lot of Redskins fans excited. And then obviously his body transformation, where he's lost about 10, 15 pounds, is down to about 7-8% body fat, which is great for him, considering he was a bit out of shape in 2019. So I don't want to say, he's going to have a huge sophomore season, but I think there's a lot of things to be excited about that people often look over and just say, oh, Haskins is a buzz. Haskins, Skins are going for Trevor Lawrence next year. Haskins, not a good player. So I think there's reason to be excited, at least within the fan base.
I will say I was never a big fan of Dwayne Haskins, even when he was a prospect. I always thought he was a little overhyped. He kind of reminded me of Byron Leftwich, who was a big bust. But that being said, I'm not ready to write him off quite yet. He does have great intangibles. And as you said, he was able to piece it together in short spurts last season. I think the NFL fan base as a whole has gotten really impatient in the development with players. It's because so many players come into the league so NFL ready. I mean, we saw Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. It took them 2 years as starters to win that first MVP. And we saw this happen with Josh Rosen 2 years ago, where Kingsbury came in and kind of wrote him off and wanted to revamp the offense and got rid of him and brought in Kyler Murray, and it worked out. And I think when Rivera came in and the Redskins looked at the roster and all these quarterback free agents that were available this offseason and not aggressively going after any of them, shows that they do believe in Haskins a lot more than the Cardinals believed in Rosen, and they don't think that Haskins is bust. They're not willing to write him off quite yet. So I think it'll be interesting. I think Rivera will put him in better positions to make plays and give him safer routes, make it easier on him to get into a rhythm. I think the big problem when you look at a young quarterback is you want to protect him, and the offensive line across the board is pretty weak. I know they brought over Sadiq Charles to try to replace some of that hole from Trent Williams leaving, but overall it's not very strong.
Well, something you just mentioned just struck a. I just remembered something, should I say, in that Scott Turner's new offensive scheme. It's a really sort of quick up-tempo passing game, heavily running back involved. Short passes to your receivers, first, second read, which is a big difference from Jay Gruden's multiple progressions of 3, 5, 7-step drops in terms of I guess the complexity of it. And Scott Turner's offensive scheme, I've been reading up a couple film studies of it, and a lot of people are saying it's really similar to Ryan Day's offensive scheme at Ohio State. And a lot of people don't know this, but when Haskins was a starter for 1 year at Ohio State, about the first third of the year, Urban Meyer was calling the offense, and Haskins was just doing okay. But then Urban Meyer handed over play calling duties to Ryan Day. And when that happened is when you really saw Dwayne Haskins burst onto the scene in 2018, when he was having those 3, 4, 5 touchdown games, 400 yards against these great Big Ten defenses. And I think those similarities of scheme will be really big for him and his development for next year.
Yeah, coming out of the draft in 2019, Dwayne Haskins was my quarterback 2 behind Kyler Murray. I knew he was a raw prospect, but I really like his ceiling. And I compared Dwayne Haskins coming out as a prospect to someone who the Ravens know very well, which is Ben Roethlisberger. They're both bigger quarterbacks who move in such a weird way. They're not necessarily mobile, but they just have a weird mobility about them. And that's what I saw from Dwayne Haskins. And last year with Dwayne Haskins, obviously he started off the year really bad, but in my opinion, he got better as the season went on. And you started to see him get a bit more confidence as the season goes on. So I think if Dwayne Haskins can carry that confidence into this year under this new system, I think he could really have a solid year. I'm not going to say he'll have a great year, but I think he could definitely improve.
Yeah, of course. And I think a lot of people like to look at stats, and Haskins' stats last year were not very eye-pleasing, I'd say. He had a 1-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, had about 57% completion. I believe he had a little under 2,000 yards. But a big thing, too, is that a lot of those people don't know is that he was obviously going in and out of the lineup, where his first game where he got game action was week 4 against the Giants. And during that game, he only came in, I believe, halfway through the second quarter, and obviously had a really bad game. And then same thing when he came in for the Vikings when Case Keenum went down with injury. But once Haskins officially became the starter, I believe he had 7 touchdowns with 3 interceptions and about 1,600 of those yards and about 6 or 7 games where he was that full starter to finish out the year. And I think that just a lot of people that just look at stats in general, and not necessarily with Haskins, but in general, just looking at stats obviously tells far from the whole story.
All right, jumping from one quarterback conversation to another, there was big news out of New England this week. Obviously, Cam Newton signing with the Patriots. As a Ravens fan, I think we focus on that a little bit more with our interconference rivalry with the Patriots, but I would love to hear your take, Jess, as someone across the league who only sees the Patriots once every 4 years but has to sit through them on national television, suffering, rooting for their opponent like the rest of us.
Yeah, of course. But I love it. I gotta say, I love it. I'm a huge Cam Newton fan in the sense that the way I see it, obviously there are reasons why people sort of dislike him, but a bit showboaty, a bit flashy with his clothing. But he's a really easy guy to root for, and I think he sort of got the short end of the stick at Carolina, where he was playing through injury or he was playing for an ownership or new general manager that didn't really want him and were sort of looking past him. And, you look at that 2018 season he had where the first half of it pre-shoulder injury, and all quarterbacks can probably attest to this, shoulder injuries are a pain to deal with, and they will really mess up your play style. So I think pre-shoulder injury, we were seeing a better season than he had in his MVP year in 2015, statistically speaking. And so I think now that he's had a lot of time to heal, he took most of 2019 off after looking kind of bad early on. Been revamping, you've seen the workout videos of him. He's looking in great shape. And I think in the New England sort of scheme of things, I think if any team was going to revive Cam Newton's career, most people would probably bet on it being the Patriots. And that usually don't bet against the Patriots. It's what we've come to learn. So I'm really excited to see what Josh McDaniels, Bill Belichick can work with him. Now, I don't think he's also the given starter either, because waiting until the end of June to get your starter for the 2020 season doesn't really seem like a smart play. So I think he's going to have to battle it out with Jarrett Stidham. And Jarrett Stidham could still become the starter. I think a lot of people are writing that off too soon.
Yeah, that was kind of my opinion on it. I thought with Cam Newton, he's not the guaranteed starter because the Patriots, they had multiple chances to take a quarterback in the draft. They could have signed the quarterback. In the draft, they could have gotten Jordan Love at 23. They decided to trade out of that spot. And then they had multiple chances to get Jacob Eason or Jake Fromm. They passed on them a bunch. So I think with them, that really shows that they really believe in Stidham. And from what I've heard, Bill Belichick loves Jarrett Stidham. So I think there's definitely going to be a competition. I don't think Cam's the guaranteed starter there.
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways you can look at it. I think the Patriots are one of those teams, this is classic Patriots, to just sit back and wait for their guy. They're not going to rush. If they didn't love any of those quarterbacks in the draft, they weren't going to reach and take one. And with this whole Corona situation, they were unable to really work out Cam in person. And instead of jumping the gun or trying to get someone else, going after Andy Dalton, they really just waited. They were patient. They took their time, and they got their guy for the fair price. I do think Stidham will have a shot as a starter. I don't think, as much as I think Cam can help the Patriots, he isn't a permanent fix. I think Belichick and that Patriot front office is looking forward to kind of rebuilding and trying to restart. Cam is certainly a temporary fix if he does play. But, Jess, you did say it correct. Right before his injury, Cam was playing exceptional football. And when people look back, they say, can he return to that 2015 NFL MVP form? And that's really hard to ask of a guy for his age to go back to his prime 5 years ago. But if you look back only 3 years ago, right before his injury, he was playing great football. He's playing very consistent football. And he can definitely, in my opinion, get back to that phase of his career, being a veteran leader and delivering the throw accurately and on time. My next question with this move is, how does he fit with the Patriots organization? I talked about this on one of our previous pods. I love Cam Newton, but as a leader, I question him sometimes. He's a little moody. He hasn't shown that quality to rise above and have great sportsmanship with the Patriots. Tom Brady has always exuded in that Patriot locker room. I don't know if he'll be a great fit for Belichick. I think he might get fed up with him at times and sort of mouth off. And then again, he's always loved his tight ends, his Greg Olsen. He's always loved his big wide receivers, his Kelvin Benjamin. Patriots play with more James White, Julian Edelman, small slot guys. We'll see how they adjust for Cam Newton in the offense if he is named the starter.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a completely different offensive scheme necessarily from what Cam Newton has had in the past, especially in Carolina, should I say. Like you mentioned, Patriots don't really have that noticeable tight end anymore. I don't even know if I could tell you who their starter is right now. Ryan Izzo? I mean, at least the average NFL fan doesn't know who. There's no Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez, Martellus Bennett there for New England anymore. And like you said, with the big wide receivers, the Devin Funcheses, the Kelvin Benjamins of the world, Patriots got, heavily running back oriented, James White, Sony Michel, Rex Burkhead. Then you've got slot receivers like Julian Edelman, Mohamed Sanu, who's coming off maybe his worst year yet. So I will agree with you a lot on that. And I do think, unfortunately, whether or not it's fair, I mean, the NFL isn't fair by any means, but I do think that this might be Cam's last shot at least being a starter in the league, because I don't know if he's going to take backup money in 2021, but I think he's got to show something this year.
Well, going back to your point where the Patriots only have like smaller guys, that is true, but Cam's final years in Carolina, he really worked with Christian McCaffrey as a pass catcher out of the backfield, so it kind of has something similar to that with James White, who's an excellent pass catching running back. And also the Patriots did draft N'Keal Harry last year, who's known to be a bigger body Des Bryant type target, the guy who I had as my wide receiver one going into that draft. So I think with Cam's reliance on bigger guys, I think N'Keal Harry could have a pretty good year.
Yeah, I was about to say that I think N'Keal Harry and Cam could have great chemistry, and you could look for him being a top target in the Patriots offense this season. And that is a good point about Christian McCaffrey. I do think him and Cam had some chemistry. Now, McCaffrey wasn't as prolific as a back as he is now when him and Cam are working together at that sort of point in Cam's career, but he certainly was a good pass catcher, similar to James White. He was shifty and a mismatch for linebackers. You're correct about that. I want to ask Jassy about Cam Newton. There was some rumors about him going to Washington early this offseason. There wasn't a lot of traction to that, but there was just some rumors that Ron Rivera would want to bring him in and sort of help Dwayne Haskins and be a little bit of a mentor to him. Ron Rivera did not do that. Instead, brought in Kyle Allen to be a backup, the other Panther quarterback he worked with last season. What were your thoughts on that?
I just wanted to clarify, is the question about Kyle Allen, or is it about like sort of passing on Cam Newton, or both?
Both. The decision to not bring in Cam Newton and not have a mentor for Dwayne Haskins, and then bring in Kyle Allen as a backup.
Awesome, yeah. So I'll touch on the Kyle Allen thing first, since that's the one that happened. But so the Redskins lost both they had 3 quarterbacks in 2019, all unfortunately got playing time, and Haskins, Case Keenum, and Colt McCoy. Keenum obviously with the Browns now, McCoy with the Giants, I believe. And so you needed a backup quarterback pretty bad. And that's when, obviously with the uncertainty with Dwayne Haskins and then the new regime taking over, a lot of people, were pegging like the Cam Newtons to happen. Or, I saw some Phillip Rivers talk there. There were some bold people saying Tom Brady. But, I mean, there were people throwing the Redskins name all around with all these different big quarterbacks that were available. But with Kyle Allen, I actually really like the move in the sense that Kyle Allen has always sort of been Ron Rivera or Norv Turner / Scott Turner's guy, in that undrafted free agent, sort of latched on as Cam's backup and then really got to play last year. Obviously was not great by any means, maybe wasn't even good, but he sort of was able to keep the ship afloat for the Panthers for a couple of games. Because I remember, I think the Panthers were 4-0, and people were saying, hey, Kyle Allen might be the new face of the Panthers. Ride this out while he's on a rookie contract. And so that obviously didn't happen, sort of became more inconsistent. But since they were probably going to use that 5th-round draft pick, they traded for Kyle Allen on a rookie quarterback in the draft. Why not grab your guy from your old team that probably doesn't want him anymore since it's a new regime in charge? And so they're pretty much able to use what would have been a developmental quarterback draft pick on a guy who's pretty much already developed and already knows the system, and that the coaching staff has faith in, that if either Dwayne Haskins' development falls apart at some point, or if he gets injured, because he did have a couple injuries last year, or if, Kyle Allen beats out Dwayne Haskins, then, they've got somebody that they have faith in. So I really like that move. As for passing on Cam Newton, I would say I was I mean, who wouldn't be intrigued by having Cam Newton as your quarterback? He's one of the probably top 5, 10 most recognizable names in the NFL. And that really would have, I guess, put some more media spotlight on the Redskins and definitely would have made them, at least people would have expected them to be much more of a competitive team in 2020 than people are expecting now. But in the long run, I'm glad they stuck with Haskins essentially because Newton, like you mentioned with the Patriots, Newton isn't their long-term answer by any means. He's only a stopgap, whether it be for a year, 2 years, 3 years. And I think that definitely would have been the case here. I wasn't really wanting my franchise to invest into a 31-year-old with injury questions, Cam Newton. It's fun to see another franchise do it, but when it's on your side of the your end of the stick, I was really hoping to just figure out what you've got in Haskins first because, like I mentioned previously, with the various offenses, there was a lot just going against him in 2019, and a lot of people just really want to see what he can do with a clean slate for 2020, and I'm glad they stuck with him.
Yeah, and one thing worth noting is Kyle Allen did have a better start to the year, and then Ron Rivera left the Panthers halfway through the year, and after that, his numbers dipped down and became less consistent. So clearly, he fit in better with Ron Rivera at the helm, and I think the signing, I don't think it puts Dwayne Haskins' job at risk, but certainly applies a little pressure. It's still his team, but a little backup who has a good relationship with the new head coach doesn't hurt a little bit. It's someone to go in the film room and kind of help him see what Ron wants to do and put that on the field.
And one final thing with Ron Rivera, I really do like the signing for Ron Rivera. I do like them bringing in Kyle Allen as the backup. And I think with Ron Rivera, a big thing with the Redskins is that he's going to be a culture changer for them. The Redskins have kind of been known for having a bad culture these past few years. Whether it's with that really bad GM, Bruce Allen, yeah, that's his name. Redskins fans hated him. I know that from what they've said on social media. But Ron Rivera brings this kind of no-nonsense, old-school approach that I think is really going to get players to buy in or else they'll leave.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that was the biggest thing that a lot of Redskins fans were happy to get Rivera for. There's really no one, either in fan bases or media or league circles, that really, don't like Ron Rivera the person. You can hear so many former players just attesting to the character and the kind of man he is, and just having that sort of integrity and honesty sort of in full control of the Redskins operation now, and sort of that trickling down through his staff and through his hirings. I really think that's going to leave an impact for the better on the team. And whether or not, Rivera works out X and O's wise, or if they make the playoffs with him, or they become a successful team, I really think even if Rivera doesn't achieve what his goal was in terms of success with the team, I think just the impact of having him in your locker room for 3, 4, 5 years, maybe more, will really just help sort of rebuild the public image of the team and help rebuild sort of a lot of the deceit, a lot of the scandals that were going on. I think just having him, I think it's going to rub off on a ton of players. I think that'll be great regardless of what happens.
Yeah, and there's sort of been a trend going on in the league where these teams that were drafting these young quarterbacks and were looking to rebuild, we're trying to find the new next great young offensive mind. The Sean McVays, the Cliff Kingsburys, the Bengals sort of reached for Zach Taylor. And the Redskins went in the opposite direction. Rivera's not really known for rebuilding teams, but he certainly, like you said, there's very little character questions about him, and what he does is he brings that old school style no nonsense football to a team's locker room, and I think that's a big step for the Redskins, who do have a lot of talent on their roster. Like I already said, that young stacked defensive line, and then they're trying to form something with Dwayne Haskins, but they have known for having troublemakers and guys who have off the field issues and have trouble with some chemistry. I think Ron Rivera is an important step in the right direction for that team. I like that move of sort of playing it safe and getting a leader at the helm instead of that trying to find the next great young offensive mind.
All righty. So one final thing. What are your guys' thoughts on the draft? What's your thoughts on the Ravens draft?
Yeah, I mean, I got their draft pulled up right here. There's not really any picks, you can sort of disagree with. Patrick Queen obviously wasn't the linebacker that a lot of Ravens fans were hoping for. There was a ton of Kenneth Murray hype pre-draft. I remember a couple of our Instagram live streams, all the comments are mostly about, did you mock us, Kenneth, or something like that. But Patrick Queen's a great consolation prize, getting someone to help bolster that front seven, which really was the glaring weakness with the team in their playoff loss against the Titans. J.K. Dobbins, I mean, it's hard to – he's a great running back. I mean, he was great for Ohio State, and I see very little chance of him at least not being a good player for any team, in the league. And I think he's really – whether or not he becomes a star, I'm not too sure on, but he's definitely going to be a solid player. And you could see Mark Ingram, as a cap casualty after 2020, in my opinion, if Dobbins really, really shines. You got a nice duo there then with Dobbins and Justice Hill. Another pick that really stood out to me, day 3, I'd say, well, day 2 was still Devin Duvernay. I mean, that was a big steal there. And such a stacked wide receiver class, his name sort of fell through the cracks. And in any other draft, it could have maybe been a second-round pick. But, nabbed him there. I believe when their comp picks, great pickup for them. But, being a student at the University of Iowa, I'd say, my guy Geno Stone, great pick round 7. Should have never been there round 7. But, the Ravens, they were to get Deshaun Elliott a couple years ago. Chuck Clark a couple years ago, too. You got great safety depth for them there. So whether or not Geno Stone really gets some playing time remains to be seen. But just love that he went to a great team. Great player, just a missile on the field. Just can be a bowling ball almost knocking players over. Decent coverage, too. Really excited to see if he develops into anything with Baltimore.
Yeah, we've already kind of discussed the Redskins draft, but just looking at the top, obviously they got their man Chase Young, the force to be reckoned with out of Ohio State, which sort of turned into defensive end U over the past few years, regarded as the top player in the draft. Then you go down the list, Antonio Gibson, I already talked about him. I really like that pick. And then Sadiq Charles, arguably a first, second round talent tackle with some off the field issues, falling to the 4th round. I think he has potential if he can sort of rein in his off-field issues to be a real special player in the league. And then Antonio Gandy Golden, we've not talked about, was the other 4th-round pick for the Redskins, the wide receiver, the Renaissance man. He can do a little bit of everything. I think him and Gibson will provide a little spark to that Redskins offense. I think McLaurin will still be the centerpiece, but both of them are kind of wild cards that can go off for big games at any moment and big plays. Those are guys you want on a young offense and a team looking for a spark and a rebuild. There's no real superstars, I'd say, in that offense. So getting guys like that can slot in and have big play potential anytime they step on the field, those are great picks.
One final thing that we haven't mentioned on this pod that I'd like to touch on before we end this is that the Ravens' backup quarterback, RG3, was drafted by the Redskins. I don't know how the Redskins fan base feels about him now, but I'm certainly excited to see how his return goes to Washington, despite him not being the starter.
Yeah, RG3 is still someone that draws anytime you seem to mention him, whether it be a Redskins post or a tweet or something like that, or you pull up some old highlights, everybody can agree, 2012 was a magical 7-game stretch, should we say, of getting to see RG3 in action. But I guess with sort of all the fallout that happened towards the end of his tenure, 2013, 14, 15, ton of controversies. You still had Kirk Cousins there, Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, Jay Gruden coming in. I'd say it became I'd say most of the Redskins fan base is still pretty split on their opinion of him. I, for one, loved him, obviously. Still really like him, still rooting for his success. So, if Robert does get any chance to start anywhere else, I'd be ecstatic for him. Actually, I believe back in middle school, I might have sent him a couple fan letters, but yeah, I'm just I'm pro Robert, but still a very divisive topic for the fan base.
Yeah, we have seen John Harbaugh and the Ravens find creative ways to get him on the field in the past. This could be a game where they try to get him a few snaps or get him a touch of the ball just for old time's sake, just to kind of start the fire within the team. I think that would be something fun to look out for.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so that's going to end this pod. I would like to thank Jess for joining today. He did an excellent job. And I'd also like to thank Brooks for always being a great help with this pod. Do you guys have any final words?
I just wanted to thank you for the most part for the opportunity. Always love talking some football. I think we got a pretty good, chemistry. We've done a couple live streams. Appreciate, getting to discuss things with Brooks on here, talk Redskins, Ravens, Cam Newton draft, the works. So, yeah, hoping everybody enjoys this pod. And if there's any topics, maybe the Skins player gets traded to the Ravens to the Skins, we'll see. Would love to be back.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed these series, having Jess on and getting a different perspective from around the league and previewing some of our matchups. And I want to thank the listeners for continuing to come back. I know we're at July 1st right now is the day we're recording this, so we're at a slow time for football. So thank you for your guys' continued support. We're going to have some big stuff coming up, and thank you for continuing to listen, and we will continue to try to find creative topics to keep you guys engaged.
All right, guys, so that's going to be it for this week's episode of the podcast. I would like to thank you to everyone for listening. Your support goes a long ways in helping to make sure this podcast continues to run. This podcast is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It is no longer available on SoundCloud, but it is available on Google Podcasts as well as Overcast, Castbox, any of those other podcast apps you may listen to. I'd like to give a big shout out today to Brooks Lebo and Kyrie Jones for helping me co-host this episode. They do a fantastic job each and every week. Both are excellent with this and know a lot about the Ravens. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Spencer Silverstein, our executive producer. We could not make this show work without him. He does all the behind-the-scenes stuff. He's the hardest worker here. Big shout out to him. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Jack Davis for making the intro for this podcast. He did a fantastic job. All of their Instagram bios are in the bio of at Everything Ravens podcast. So make sure to hit them up, give them a follow. That's all we have for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in. Go Ravens.
They gonna get a Super Bowl out of me. Believe that. Believe that.
No copyright intended. All content rights go to their respective owners.